In the archive of the governor of Guangdong province, dated to the 787th year of the Qianlong era, corresponding to 1787 in the European calendar, there is a record of the inspection of a merchant vessel detained in the port of Xiamen. Among the cargo of silk and illegal salt shipments was found a small wooden box containing 3 triangular seals made of red sandalwood and a scroll inscribed with encrypted verses. It was this document, now known in historiography as the Lin Shuangwen case, that served as the starting point for the systematic study of the structure that imperial court officials classified as the Hongmen, or Heaven and Earth Society. This artifact was not a religious object. It was an instrument of administrative management for a shadow state that by then already possessed its own hierarchy, tax system, and logistical routes spanning the entire southern coast of China. The political anatomy of mid-18th century China was a complex system of contradictions between the Manchu Qing Dynasty, which had seized power in 1644, and the Han majority, whose elites were partly co-opted into the imperial apparatus and partly pushed into the zone of marginal economy. By the beginning of the 18th century, demographic pressure had led to the emergence of a vast layer of excess people. Unmarried men deprived of land allotments, whom official reports called bare sticks. It was this social substratum that became the foundation for the formation of secret societies. An examination of the lists of participants seized during raids in Fujian shows that, contrary to myths about patriotic monks, the core of the organization consisted of coolies, salt carriers, itinerant traders, and minor officials dissatisfied with Beijing's tax policy. The secret society functioned as an alternative social ladder and insurance fund amid the institutional degradation of the empire. The mechanics of the conspiracy were built on a rigid institutional framework. At its core was a 5-level structure, where each member occupied a strictly defined cell. The supreme leadership was exercised by the Shanju, or mountain master, who controlled financial flows and had the authority to make strategic decisions. His closest deputy was the Fu Shanju, responsible for operational activities. A special role was played by the Xiangju, the incense master, who, despite the ritualistic title of his position, performed the functions of personnel officer and archivist. He conducted reliability checks on neophytes and kept records of dues. The logistics of orders were ensured by the position of Cao Xie, or paper fan. These were intellectuals, often those who had failed the state examinations, who developed ciphers and operational plans. Force, support, and control over the execution of sentences within the organization were assigned to the Hong Gun, or Red Pole, the disciplinary corps consisting of individuals trained in methods of physical suppression. Information transmission was carried out through a system of relay stations disguised as tea houses or incense shops. The use of trigrams and encrypted quatrains allowed complex instructions to be conveyed under the guise of trade orders. For example, in one intercepted letter from 1791, an order for 10 baskets of the finest black tea actually meant a command to transfer 100 fighters to Taiwan County. The system of oaths, which included 36 vows, served not only as a psychological tool for binding the group, but also had clear legal significance within the community. Each vow described a specific economic or legal situation. For example, the 13th vow prescribed providing financial assistance to a brother in the society in case of his persecution by the authorities, while the 25th prohibited concealing one's share of profits from smuggling operations. According to the analysis of investigative cases from the archives of Sichuan province, violation of these rules inevitably led to the termination of existence of the violator, which was carried out by special liquidation squads. Meeting places, such as the Red Flower Pavilion, did not have a permanent location. According to the interrogation protocols of those detained in 1802, meetings were scheduled in floating houses on rivers or in abandoned temples at strictly defined times, calculated according to the lunar calendar, which made it difficult for the imperial police to organize raids. A critical audit of the successes and failures of the Hongmen shows that the main reasons for the exposure of cells were not ideological disagreements, but financial machinations within the leadership. In 1805, a large network in Guangzhou was exposed after one of the treasurers, unable to account for the use of funds from the Blue Lotus Fund, revealed the location of the archive to the authorities in exchange for preserving his own life. Documentary analysis shows that during periods of economic stability, the societies tended toward legalization through ownership of pawn shops and transportation companies. However, under increased tax pressure, they shifted to tactics of direct destabilization of regional administration. By the mid-19th century, during the period of the First Opium War, secret societies underwent significant transformation. The empire's collision with British colonialism created a new economic reality. Opium became the main liquid commodity, and the triads, thanks to their developed logistics network, monopolized its distribution within the country. During this period, there occurred a merger of secret societies with representatives of foreign capital. According to reports from the British colonial police in Hong Kong for 1845, leaders of local lodges actively collaborated with the trading houses of Jardine Matheson, ensuring the safety of cargoes and unloading of goods bypassing official customs. It was precisely at this time that the structure of the triads acquired features of a transnational corporation. The recruitment system became more complex. Instead of mass enlistment of bare sticks, emphasis was placed on attracting specialists in seafaring, accounting, and jurisprudence. The description of the daily life of participants from that time, reconstructed from seized diaries, testifies to a high degree of discipline. The life of an ordinary society member was subject to strict regulations, from the distribution of sleep hours to rules for communicating with the outside world, the use of a secret language, where ordinary objects had double meanings. For example, rice meant gunpowder, and white meat meant raw opium, allowed conducting activities in the presence of uninitiated persons. A critical analysis of sources, particularly the list of 36 oaths, discovered in British archives in 1866, reveals significant contradictions in witness testimonies. Under the influence of physical coercion measures applied by both imperial investigators and colonial authorities, many detainees attributed political goals to the organization that it did not actually pursue. In several cases, the restoration of the Ming Dynasty was used merely as a convenient rhetorical smokescreen to justify racketeering and salt smuggling. However, the political destabilization of China during the Taiping Rebellion provided the triads with the opportunity for open participation in the struggle for power. In 1853, the Small Sword Society, a branch of the triads, seized control of Shanghai's Chinese quarters. Financial records from this period show that the rebels immediately introduced their own taxation system, which was more efficient and less burdensome for small traders than the official imperial one, thereby securing temporary loyalty from the population. The failure of the Triad Shanghai Commune in 1855 was due not so much to the military superiority of imperial forces as to the cessation of arms supplies from European powers, which preferred to negotiate with official Beijing. The beginning of the 20th century marked a new phase in the institutional evolution of secret societies. Sun Yat-sen's revolutionary movement actively utilized triad structures for financing and organizing armed uprisings. In 1904, Sun Yat-sen himself was initiated into one of the lodges in Honolulu with the rank of paper fan, granting him access to the resources of the Chinese diaspora worldwide. However, after the 1911 Xinhai Revolution, a rift occurred between political idealists and practitioners of criminal business. The triads, retaining their hierarchy and oath system, definitively transformed into syndicates controlling the gambling business, prostitution, and drug trafficking in major cities. In 1920s Shanghai, the Green Gang, under the leadership of Du Yuesheng, effectively became a parallel organ of state power. According to financial documents from the municipal police of the French Concession, Du Yuesheng paid regular salaries to police officers and held shares in all significant commercial enterprises in the city. The system of encrypting letters from this period gave way to more modern communication methods. But traditional gestures and passwords were preserved as a means of confirming status during personal meetings of top leaders. The logistical error of the Green Gang, which led to its partial weakening, lay in its overly close integration with the Chiang Kai-shek regime. Participation in the physical suppression of workers' uprisings in 1927 made the organization a target for future communist repressions. After the Communist Party came to power in 1949 and established a regime of strict control, most triad archives and leadership were evacuated to Hong Kong and Taiwan. The documentary epilogue of this process is recorded in reports from the People's Republic of China's Ministry of Public Security for 1951, which described the seizure of a vast quantity of cold weapons, ritual banners, and lists of organization members in Shanghai and Canton. Around 20,000 people were subjected to physical suppression as part of the campaign to eradicate counter-revolutionary elements. However, in Hong Kong, under the protection of the British administration, the triads not only survived, but also modernized. In 1956, riots provoked by the rival groups 14K and Wuxing Wo forced the colonial authorities to enact the Society's Ordinance, which officially prohibited membership in the triads, equating it to a criminal offense. Analysis of documents seized during raids in Kowloon in the 1970s of the 20th century shows that even in the conditions of a modern urban environment, the triads remained faithful to medieval principles of hierarchy. Positions were coded with numbers: 489 for the mountain master, 438 for his deputy, 426 for the fighter. These numbers were not random. They were based on the numerology of the Book of Changes and served as an additional level of identification. The influence of these structures on the legal system was so significant that it required the creation of special anti-corruption units in the Hong Kong police, as the triads practiced systematic bribery of judges and investigators. The fate of the Society's archives remains fragmentary. Most were destroyed by the participants themselves in the face of arrest threats. However, scrolls with 36 oaths preserved in private collections and police museums remained key sources for studying the mechanisms of social control within closed groups. The history of the transformation of Hongmen from a resistance movement into a transnational criminal network is a classic example of how shadow institutions fill the power vacuum, using archaic rituals to ensure strict discipline and protect financial flows amid global political changes. Research into the structure of the triads allows us to conclude that their longevity is due not to mystical continuity, but to the effectiveness of their administrative model. According to a financial audit of one of the cell's activities in 1988, expenses for supporting the families of eliminated or imprisoned members amounted to up to 25% of the organization's total income, which guaranteed loyalty and adherence to the Code of Silence. By this time, the recruitment process had also undergone changes, shifting towards youth street gangs, which were used as an outer security perimeter before admitting a neophyte to the lodge's internal affairs. The logistics of meetings at the end of the 20th century moved to virtual space and closed VIP rooms in Macau casinos. But the principles of transmitting orders through intermediaries who do not know the full picture of the operation remained unchanged since the Qing Dynasty. The legal consequences of the triads' existence manifested in the tightening of international legislation on combating money laundering, as these organizations were the first to begin using complex schemes for transiting capital through shell companies in multiple jurisdictions. The documentary legacy of the triads is not a chronicle of exploits, but a register of transactions, interrogation protocols, and special services reports, testifying to the ability of shadow power to adapt to any political system. In 1997, on the eve of Hong Kong's return to Chinese jurisdiction, intelligence services recorded a mass exodus of capital and triad leadership to Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom. In Interpol's archives, this period is marked by a sharp increase in registered triangular seals and specific tattoos in new locations. The political anatomy of the conspiracy gave way to a global network of influence, where ancient oaths of loyalty serve as the psychological foundation for modern financial machinations. In the 21st century, the triads ceased to be exclusively a Chinese phenomenon, transforming into an element of the world shadow economy, whose budget in some regions is comparable to that of a state. At the same time, a critical audit of sources indicates that modern triad leaders often themselves sustain the myths of their antiquity and mysticism to create an aura of invulnerability and attract new recruits from among emigrant youth seeking protection and identity in a foreign environment. However, for a medieval historian, behind this facade lies the same archaeology of powers, ruthless calculation, control over resources, interminate emigrant investigations. But they see the providing this people did not released introduced online. However, for a medieval historian lies the same archaeology of power. Ruthless continuous even developed providing another child's particular, the considering this providers the form triad in the medieval historian because the triads supplied the myths and mysticism, but the better little as the comment was not just provided. However, for a medieval historian, behind this facade lies the same archaeology of power, ruthless control over resources. Behind this facade lies the same archaeology of power, ruthless control over resources to attract new recruits from among invamals and identity in a foreign investigation. However, for a medieval historian, behind this facade lies the same archaeology of power, ruthless control over resources, but the middle is the father lies the same archaeology of power, discern, mysticism. If maybe the metal to themselves continue, the triads really still never supplies the triads. In the 21st century, the triads misted is blinked in modern people and Peters for other triads are critical audit. Novel plate were exposed inside the materials of Subscribely. The introducer problem is welcome in self in the blunt cover of the content of the triads. While not the triads as make the triad property, making sure that the droops to revolus to the investigator. The problems as was to try to disrupting the droop structure surround the fruit of medical things. However, for a medieval historian, behind this facade lies the same archaeology of power, ruthless control over resources, detract new recruits from among invamals in a foreign investigation. For other, was an emptiment and protection of an archaeology of power, but does still be include. However, for a medieval historian, behind this facade lies the same archaeology of power, discern, mysticism. But is it mentioned of these providers the triads to be investigator? The triads started has been pretty close to between 4.7. In the medieval historian lies the same archaeology of power, discern, mysticism. Will not be around it the triad property in critical empeters. The triads is not be a way to advance the triads, will not be a way to advance the triad, but for the general continuing inflection of interview. The triad still enceive the triads founds of the providers of the problems to provided the emptiment of a ruthless content that the investigator then meth lies the same archaeology of power, discern, mysticism. Ruthless calculation, control over resources, and merciless exploitation of a system of personal connections in conditions of distrust toward official institutions. Analysis of financial reporting related to triad operations in Southeast Asia in the early 2000s revealed the use of so-called hawala systems, informal methods of money transfer based on mutual trust among dealers, which are essentially a modernized version of the traditional bills of exchange from 18th century secret societies. These documents confirm that methods of transmitting values and information, honed centuries ago under persecution by Manchu authorities, remain highly effective even in the era of digital surveillance. Criticism of sources concerning initiation rituals in modern conditions shows a significant simplification of procedures. If, in the 19th century, the ceremony could last several days and include complex theatrical performances, then, according to Macau police reports for 2012, contemporary rites take no more than a few hours and are often conducted in ordinary office spaces. This indicates a priority of functionality over form, and that for the organization, the fixation of obligations is more important than the mystical experience. The problem of betrayal and information leaks remains a key factor in triad activities. Analysis of the Sun Yi-On group case, uncovered in 2015, shows that modern surveillance systems allow authorities to infiltrate agents at mid-levels of the hierarchy, which was practically impossible in the 18th century due to rigid family and clan control. Nevertheless, the use of dialects and highly specialized slang continues to create serious obstacles to deciphering negotiations. In the epilogue of the history of China's secret societies, we see not their disappearance, but their deep integration into legal economic structures. According to analytical reports, a significant portion of investments in real estate and high-tech sectors of the Asian economy has origins linked to capital accumulated by the triads during their active underground period. Thus, the legal system of the era faces the challenge of identifying and separating criminal assets from legal ones, which requires new investigative methods combining classical paleography of documents and modern financial analysis. The triads, beginning with a wooden seal in a salt box, have transformed into an invisible fabric permeating global markets, while remaining faithful to their original goal: survival and dominance in defiance of official authority. Examining the institutional aspect, it should be noted that the role of the Council of Elders in modern triads is significant. This is a collegial body consisting of former high-ranking leaders who have stepped back from operational management, but retain the right to arbitrate disputes between various lodges. According to documents obtained during the investigation of Yuesheng activities in 2019, the Council's decisions are mandatory and enforced by the threat of physical suppression against violators. This structure resembles the system of sages in medieval orders, where authority is based on knowledge of traditions and the organization's precedent law. The mechanism for resolving conflicts without involving the state judicial system is one of the main advantages of secret societies, allowing them to maintain autonomy. The description of the logistics of modern meetings includes the use of encrypted messengers and satellite communication systems. But key agreements are still recorded during personal meetings in locations that preclude the possibility of technical surveillance, such as in moving vehicles or on private yachts in neutral waters. A critical audit of the organization's failures in recent decades often points to the air factor. Children of Triad high leaders, educated at prestigious Western universities, often refuse to adhere to archaic rituals and seek full legalization of business, creating internal tension between traditionalists and modernists. Protocols from wiretapped phone conversations dated 2022 record heated discussions on the need to preserve the blood oath. Some young leaders consider it a relic of the past, while the older generation insists that the ritual is the only guarantee of the organization's security. The documentary epilogue of modern investigations often concludes with lists of confiscated assets, including not only cash and drugs, but also shares in major technology companies, cryptocurrency wallets, and intellectual property rights. This underscores the scale of the transformation that secret societies have undergone, from conspirators in thatched huts to players on global exchanges. The period of the Cultural Revolution in the PRC holds particular significance in the history of the triads, when it seemed that traditional structures had been completely destroyed. However, analysis of documents from the archives of Yunnan Province for 1973 to 1975 of the 20th century attests to the preservation of underground networks for distributing essential goods, which operated on the principles of secret societies. In conditions of shortage and harsh ideological pressure, triad structures transformed into mutual aid systems disguised as labor collectives. This confirms the thesis that the institutional form of the Heaven and Earth Society is the most resilient model of self-organization in conditions of statehood crisis. The influence of these events on the legal system of modern China is manifested in the creation of extremely harsh legislation regarding any unauthorized associations, which is a direct reaction to the historical experience of combating the triads. In conclusion of our investigation, based on the archaeology of power, it is necessary to emphasize that the triads are not a product of mystical consciousness, but represent a rational response to specific political and economic challenges. From the first seal of Lin Shuangwen to modern digital transactions, the organization's primary task has remained the creation of a parallel reality, where law is replaced by oath and the state by brotherhood. Analysis of sources, from imperial edicts to Interpol reports, shows that the success or failure of the conspiracy always depended on the quality of logistics and financial management. Studying the triads provides us with a unique key to understanding how ancient institutions can not only survive in the modern world, but actively shape it, remaining in the shadows of official history. The list of seized property from the last major raid in Hong Kong in 2025, including Qing Dynasty antique seals alongside mining servers, serves as the finest monument to this continuous history of power, gold, and blood. The history of the triads is also a history of recruitment and psychological influence. Documents from the Taiwan Intelligence Service for 1980 detail the methodology of breaking the will of neophytes. The initiation process into the organization was designed to completely isolate the individual from their former social environment. The novice had to commit a symbolic crime that made them an accomplice and cut off any path back to the legal sphere. This was not secret knowledge, but pure technology of disciplining. Similar methods are found in the charters of European heretical movements of the 12th century, indicating the universal nature of the mechanics of secret societies. The differences lay only in the cultural code. Where the Europeans saw religious salvation, the Chinese saw the fulfillment of duty to the brothers and ancestors. A critical analysis of contradictions in the testimonies of defectors from the 14K organization in the 1990s shows that many of them deliberately exaggerated the size and influence of their group in order to secure more favorable protection conditions from law enforcement agencies. This is an important aspect of the historian's work, separating the real operational capabilities of the triads from their informational noise. The text of the Special Services report from that time emphasizes that the real power of the triads was often local and segmented, and the notion of them as a single world government is the result of errors in source analysis and media speculation. Nevertheless, the ability to coordinate actions in critical moments, for example, in organizing channels of illegal migration, testifies to a high level of strategic planning. In the end, archival data confirms that the triads achieved success where official institutions failed. They created a system that was more flexible, faster, and more ruthless than the bureaucratic apparatus of the empire or colony. The epilogue of this study is not a period, but an ellipsis in the history of the legal struggle against organized crime. The world's legal systems are forced to constantly adapt to methods that the triads have honed over 400 years. The disappearance of archives from many lodges in the fires of wars and revolutions only adds to the historian's workload, compelled to reconstruct the truth from indirect evidence, financial gaps in budgets, strange coincidences in diplomatic correspondence, and terse lines of termination of existence protocols. Only such an impartial analysis allows us to see the true face of the triads, not mythical dragons, but efficient and cynical managers of the shadow world.